Hello everybody and welcome to another MMO video, and today, now that we've gotten a chance to play the beta, we're going to be taking an in-depth look at everything you should know about Dune Awakening, which is set to release fully on the 10th of June this year, though you can start playing it from the 5th of June with certain pre-order packs. Now for more MMO related content or for more of my dumbass takes, make sure to subscribe to my channel below, but even if you don't, it's okay, I forgive you. So either way, let's dive right into it. Okay, so Dune Awakening is a survival shooter MMO that's set on the planet Arrakis, and obviously it's based on the amazing Dune series of novels by Frank Herbert and the equally amazing Dune series of movies by Denis Villeneuve. Now I personally love both of those Dune series, so that's already a pretty big selling point for me. Now the game itself is developed by Funcom, which is a reasonably big name in the MMO genre, and they were the same people who made Conan Exiles, Age of Conan, and a bunch of other smaller MMOs. Fun fact, Funcom is another sizable Western game company that is now owned by good old Tencent, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, so as I mentioned, the game is a survival shooter MMO, so you're gonna be looking at a semi-sandbox, pun intended, game that is generally PvP centric with a lot of danger that you're gonna have to kind of be careful of when you're exploring and trying to make your way through Arrakis. Plus, because it is a shooter MMO, you're gonna be mostly using guns for combat, although there is melee combat as well, both of which we'll cover in more detail in a bit. Now, I won't lie. If any of that puts you off, which I know it will for a lot of people, that's totally understandable. Not everyone likes survival games, not everyone likes PvP focused games, and not everyone likes shooter MMOs. But these are the things that make Dune Awakening what it is. They're intangibles and ultimately a matter of personal preference and a completely reasonable deal breaker. So if it does put you off, no problem. This is just not the game for you. That said, if it doesn't put you off, keep watching, because now we're going to dive into the specific details of this game. Okay, so the first specific detail that we're going to talk about is of course the first tool you'll always use in any MMO, and that is the character creator. Now, I just want to mention quickly that right now, you can hop on Steam and download just the character creator for Dune Awakening right now and make your character so you're ready to dive straight in when it does come out. Okay, so let's talk about the character creator itself. Dune Awakening's character creator is actually really detailed. In fact, I'd say it's almost as detailed as a Korean MMO. It's just kind of missing the insane control over individual muscle groups that you get with a game like Black Desert Online. Still, you can choose between a ton of different options for skin color, skin features, hair, faces, age, blemishes, tattoos on bodies and faces, and much more. Even more interesting than what you can change is what you can change to. There is a ton of diversity in the options, so much so that I think this might actually be the most diversity I've ever seen in an MMO in a very long time. This is amazing if you want to make a character that really looks like you, no matter what part of our world you're playing from. Either way, when you're done with the aesthetics of your character, you get asked a few questions that let you choose your background. This part is kind of important because this is what determines your faction and your starting class. Now, Dune Awakening has a very versatile class system that pretty much lets you have access to all of the available classes on one character, so you absolutely are not locked into your starting class. But it does have a pretty big impact on the early game, so you want to make sure that you pick the one that you want to stick with for a while. All in all though, I think the character creator for Dune Awakening is really good, and you can definitely get close to whatever look you have in mind. Okay, so now let's talk about the second most important choice in the game, your class and the class system. In any MMO, your class defines how you fight, how you contribute in groups, and how you experience the game. And this is no different in Dune Awakening, except for the fact that you're never actually locked into a single class. There are 5 classes to choose from, and you can eventually obtain skills from each of them, pretty freely in fact. That said, you do have to choose a starting class when you make your character, and you'll be kind of sticking with that choice for quite a while until you get access to the rest of the classes. Now, the 5 classes in Dune Awakening are Trooper, Mentat, Bene Gesserit, Swordmaster, and one extra class, the Planetologist. Just to note though, you can actually only choose between the Trooper, the Mentat, the Bene Gesserit, and the Swordsmaster when you're creating your character. The Planetologist is a special class that we'll talk about in a second. Now, if you're familiar with Dune, these may be relatively straightforward to you, but if you're not, don't worry, I'm here for you. Here's what you should know. Troopers are built for ranged combat with lots and lots of offensive skills and even explosives to make them really good fighters. They would be your main damage dealing DPS class, and they're more or less the best ranged DPS in the game. Mentats are human computers, and they're built for recon and intel gathering with skills to reveal enemies and scout whole areas. They are more like the support class of Dune Awakening, and they debuff enemies and buff allies. The Bene Gesserit, the coolest class in my opinion, in the lore are an all-female organization of essentially psychics that can use something called the Voice to manipulate their own and other people's bodies. In the game though, this is not a gender-locked class. In fact, there are no gender-locked classes in Dune Awakening. The Bene Gesserit are kind of like assassins with a lot of crowd control abilities, high damage, and really interesting ways to use the Voice to gain advantages in fights. The final combat class is the Swordmaster. These are masters of melee combat with a ton of survivability and high short range damage. They would kind of fill a tank-like role and melee DPS roles the best. Now, I want to be very clear. Even though I'm associating these classes with typical MMO classes, you should know that none of them are set in stone to perform a specific role in Dune Awakening. All the classes are actually pretty strong and usable at all the stages of the game. Plus, all of these classes have a ton of party utility, so it doesn't seem like any of them will be non-viable in any content. Okay, so the last available class is that special extra one that I was talking about earlier, and that is the Planetologist. Now, this class is more of a self-utility thing that helps you explore Arrakis, gather more materials, craft more efficiently, and it won't really help you in combat much, really at all, but it is incredibly useful in pretty much every other activity that you will be doing in Dune Awakening. And that's pretty much all the classes. All in all, I quite like the loose class system that they've gone with. It adds a lot of variety in skill builds since you can mix and match from different class trees, and it gives you a lot of different ways to play the game however you think is the most fun. And besides, anything that improves self-expression is a win in my book. Okay, so once you've made a character and decided on your starting class, you get thrown into Arrakis. So let's talk about what you see, the world, and visuals. Dune Awakening boasts really beautiful visuals with genuinely phenomenal lighting effects. I wouldn't say it's quite as beautiful as games like Black Desert Online or Throne and Liberty, especially on their maximum settings, but it is still straight up beautiful. The world is clearly modeled after the Dune movie series and not its own take on the novels, but they've done an amazing job at making you feel like you're in that same world as those movies. Now, it is a survival MMO, so you do need to manage things like hydration, stamina, and be wary of dangers in the world, but even those dangers are often kind of amazing to look at. For example, the sun is super strong and burns really bad, so you do need to stick to the shadows as much as possible during the day, but the way that sun lights up the surface of the planet and the way that the light filters through the caves is amazingly pretty. Another example is that running on open sand attracts the infamous sandworms of Arrakis, the Shai Hulud, which are these truly gigantic worms that travel under the dunes and emerge to feed. This is obviously bad for you because, you know, what they want to feed on is you, but honestly, it's actually so fun to do on purpose because seeing them emerge is unreasonably cool to witness. This was actually a pretty big concern for me because Arrakis is supposed to be a super barren landscape, but they've done a really good job with balancing the desert nature of the planet without making it too empty. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that the soundtrack is incredible. The music they've chosen matches that of the movies as well, and while it's not actually Hans Zimmer for the game, it's good, man. It's real good. It's so atmospheric and perfectly suited to every location and scene in the game, and honestly, it's probably my favorite overall soundtrack of any recent MMO. All of that is to say that all in all, they've done a great job on the world design, the visuals, and the overall atmosphere of the game. Okay, let's move on to what is probably the main part of Dune Awakening, and that is combat. So combat in Dune Awakening is split into two forms, melee and ranged, and while they each have different mechanics, they both have a shared core issue, and in fact, this is actually where I feel the game is unfortunately the weakest. But okay, let me explain. Melee combat is straightforward with three main mechanics: attacking, blocking, and slow attacking. The normal attack is just a simple blade action that you can spam, and you can block attacks with your blade as well, and if you time that right, it counts as a parry. The slow attack is the one kind of interesting interesting thing with melee combat, and it's basically a way to, well, attack very slowly. Now, this might seem kind of silly if you're unfamiliar with the lore of Dune, but basically there are these personal body shields that block fast-moving objects like bullets, so the only way to get through them is to attack really slowly, and that's essentially what slow attack is for. Still though, even with that, melee combat is still very simple, and most of the time you're just gonna be holding a button down. Then on the other hand, range combat has even fewer mechanics, because all you need to do is really to aim and shoot. Whether you're in a PvE fight or a PvP fight, that's kind of all you have to do ever. Aim and shoot. The problem is, the aiming isn't that good. It's like weirdly sluggish, and most guns that aren't sniper rifles feel really weirdly inaccurate, even when scoped in. I play tech FPS games like Valorant, and the difference in how satisfying shooting feels is night and day. Dune Awakening's combat lacks weight and fluidity, and it feels raggedy and unpolished, so honestly, it's not a very nice thing to do. Which is a shame because it's kind of what the game is built around. Now, the last thing I want to talk about in combat are the skills that you get through your class trees. These are essentially pieces of utility that can help you win fights, and while they're not really super useful early on, they do become very useful later on, especially in group content, which we'll talk about in a bit. Overall though, while the skills can add a bit of tactical depth later on, especially in endgame content, the combat itself is relatively straightforward, and mechanically, it's very simplistic for pretty much the whole game. It's nowhere near as fun or nearly as deep and interesting as a game like Black Desert Online or Throne and Liberty, and I feel as though it might become kind of boring pretty quickly. Okay, so the combat isn't amazing, but what are we even fighting? Let's talk about PvE and PvP. To start off, the world is divided into 3 types of zones. There are protected zones where PvP is not allowed, limited warfare zones where PvP is only allowed during special events like faction contracts, and full PvP zones like the Deep Desert, where open world PvP is fully encouraged. Now, as you may have guessed, the more dangerous a zone, the better the materials you can gather, and the best place to gather spice, which is what Arrakis is infamous for, will be the Deep Desert, where everyone can fight and kill each other. Okay, let's look a little closer and start with PvE. This consists of fighting AI enemies, usually scavengers called Fremen or the Emperor's troops called the Sardaukar. These enemies use both ranged and melee weapons depending on how far you are when you fight them, and most of these fights are really easy. They can seem kind of difficult at first if there's a lot of them and only one of you, and it's those situations that PvE is the most fun, relatively. Unfortunately though, they're only difficult for a bit because the AI is insanely stupid. If you're able to hide behind even the smallest of rocks, they'll completely forget you exist like a baby with no object permanence. Once you realize this, even those fights against multiple opponents becomes really easy because you can just straight up crouch and shoot from behind a rock the size of a basketball and they will just fully be unable to hit you. That said, there are some interesting PvE events. As an example, if you get spotted by one of the helicopter looking things called an ornithopter, you'll get stunned for a bit and then swarmed by Sardaukar, which can be kind of a tense and fun little moment. Unfortunately though, even those events are not very difficult because again, you can always cheese it. It's kind of impossible to not cheese it because the AI is genuinely just that stupid. Besides those events though, there are also dungeons known as ecology labs, and these can be a little bit more challenging than the open world fights, but honestly, they're not that crazy either. You just run through them from start to finish and it's all pretty straightforward. All in all, PvE, to me, is a pretty big disappointment. The sheer stupidity of the AI combined with the janky combat we talked about earlier kinda makes these fights feel more like chores than meaningful gameplay. Now, on the other hand, PvP is actually kind of fun and comes in a few forms. First, there's the open world PvP in the zones that allow it, and you will even drop some of your items when you're killed, so there are consequences to not being careful. Besides that, you've also got fairly large-scale guild battles. In those, guilds of pretty much any size can fight over territory, protect caravans, and siege outposts. These large-scale battles are pretty much the most fun you'll probably have in Dune Awakening. They're not quite as large-scale as Throne and Liberty's guild battles, but they're still really fun and exciting to take part in, especially if you've got friends to do it with. Overall, while the PvE is beyond a doubt lacking, if you're a fan of PvP, the game will be a lot more fun for you. Okay, so next let's talk about two of the most important non-combat systems in the game, and those are crafting and base building. Both crafting and base building are essential systems in Dune Awakening, so they're both things that you'll pretty much have to do at some point, and you'll probably do more or less throughout the whole game. Let's start with the crafting system, which is actually quite comprehensive. You can and probably will have to craft all of your weapons, armor, utilities like bottles, bandages, and pretty much every other thing you'll need to make your way across Arrakis. Of course, you can buy those items too, but most of the time you'll probably be making them yourself. To craft items, you'll first have to use a tool called a cutter ray. You'll use this to collect materials in the open world, from ores to scraps to biological materials. Then, using those materials, you can craft simple items directly from your inventory, or use a fabricator in your base for more complex items. The system itself has some amount of depth, with a ton of craftable items on launch, and even more presumably being released with time. It's actually a pretty great system, and it makes it worthwhile to explore Arrakis completely, since some of the materials will only be available in some parts of the planet, and you'll kinda need them eventually to keep progressing. You'll also need to keep the tech tree in mind as you level up, because that is how you'll unlock new recipes to craft new items. Overall, I think it's always great when crafting is a core part of an MMO, because it's actually a really great way to add incentives to keep engaging with open world content rather than the game becoming a rushing to endgame type of thing. Now, besides crafting, there's also the other thing I talked about, which is base building. And this is actually also incredibly important in Dune Awakening. If you can't guess by the name, it's basically the concept of building a home or a base somewhere in the planet for you to have as your own. You get access to a ton of different options for how you want your base to look and feel, and you can build it almost anywhere that there's enough space to do so, including PvP areas. Just so you know, by the way, nobody is able to destroy it, so it'll be safe pretty much wherever you decide to plop it down. In fact, the building system actually feels very similar to that of Once Human, with the biggest difference being the complete lack of wooden items because, it's a desert. It's Arrakis, it's a desert world. So, no wood. Either way, your base, your stone base really, is like a safe haven, protecting you from a lot of the dangers of Arrakis, from the weather to the NPC enemies, and being a place where you store your items, vehicles, water, crafting stations, and anything else that you're not lugging around in the sand. I personally love a good construction system in an MMO because it adds such a huge aspect of customization, allowing you to really make your mark on the world and to create something that's yours and unique to you. Plus, it's always nice to be able to come back to a home after exploring for a few hours, right? So all in all, I really like this system. The next thing I want to touch on is something that has a pretty significant impact on your overall game experience, and that is performance. Overall, the game runs just okay. The frame rate isn't anything to write home about, but for the most part, you'll be able to hit a pretty consistent 60 FPS on a mid-tier PC like the one that I have. That said, whenever there's a lot happening, like when a sandworm emerges and kicks a lot of dirt around, or in a larger scale PvP battle over a spice field, your frame rate will probably drop a lot. In fact, for how the game looks, the frame rate is actually kind of bad. Even games with much more post-processing and detail like Black Desert Online have better frame rates for me personally. So the game is definitely somewhat under-optimized. On top of that, the game is also definitely still kind of buggy. I've seen sandworms stuck in the upright position like they're pillars or a certain body part. I've gotten stuck in rocks so many times, and there are a ton of visual bugs as well. All in all, these bugs and those performance issues are just another significant pain point for this game, and it's especially bad because it's not a free game, and it's not that cheap of a game either, so you definitely do expect a certain level of polish that is unfortunately not all the way there in Dune Awakening. Now, I do want to be clear though, it's more than playable, and even the bugs most of the time aren't really game breaking or anything, but still the overall performance is quite disappointing. Okay, so now let's talk about what is probably the biggest question mark surrounding new MMOs, and that is the monetization model. Dune Awakening has no subscriptions, and supposedly it comes with absolutely zero pay to win. Instead, the game is buy to play, with any DLCs that will be released in the future being buy to play as well. Essentially, it's pretty much the same exact system as the one that Guild Wars 2 uses. Right now, you can pre-purchase the game, and there are 3 packs available for you to buy. The standard edition is $50 $50 US, the deluxe edition is $70 US, and the ultimate edition is $90 US. That's a lot of US dollars, so keep those prices a secret or they might try to tariff it. Now, all of those packs give you access to the game when it launches on the 10th of June, but the deluxe and ultimate packs give you a bit of an early start, giving you access to the game from the 5th of June. Take it from me though, this is pretty much useless. The game is not so short or small that a 5-day head start is gonna make any sort of significant difference in the long run. However, those two packs both also give you a season pass, which actually is useful because it gives you access to the next 4 DLCs, including the one launching with the game and the other 3 set to launch in the near future. Now, this will most likely be worth it if you plan to play the game for a long time, because these DLCs are set to keep introducing a ton of new content to the game, such as adding new areas, enemies, and presumably even things like gear and story content. So it is a good bargain to grab that season pass rather than buying the DLCs individually, but again, that's only really if you're sure that you'll play for that long. Also, do keep in mind that the pricing for each of these packs might be different for you, since the game is sold through Steam and Steam has regional pricing. So the cost of each pack will pretty much change depending on your Steam store location. Now, all of that sounds great and I love a game with no pay to win, but that's just if you take their word for it. Personally, I'm kind of torn. On one hand, the monetization model does look good and usually games with similar models remain fair. On the other hand though, it is Funcom, and if you're familiar with them, you know that they're absolutely no strangers to greed. The thing is, as with any new MMO, it's just something we'll have to wait and see if they keep their promise, but you know, I hope they will. Right now though, the only things you can purchase for real world money are cosmetic items and skins, so far, all good. Regardless, all in all, I'm a huge fan of this sort of monetization system, and I've always thought that Guild Wars 2 was the pinnacle of MMO monetization, and since this is the same system, I do like it a lot. It's a pretty fair policy in my opinion, and it makes it really easy to take long-term breaks and jump back into the game whenever a new DLC launches, so all in all, as long as they do actually stick to that no pay to win promise, I'm pretty happy about it. So, the burning question: should you pre-purchase Dune Awakening to play it on launch? Well, it depends. Straight off rip, if you don't like survival MMOs, shooter MMOs, PvP-centric MMOs, sci-fi MMOs, or the desert aesthetic of Arrakis, the answer should be a resounding no. If you really like those things, the answer is a solid yes. If you don't mind them, but if you just want a great MMO experience, the answer is maybe not. The game is pretty fun, don't get me wrong, and I love the crafting and construction systems, but outside of that, it's still relatively lacking in content, with a lot of the gameplay loop feeling pretty much the same as you progress. Sure, you do unlock new recipes and new materials and all of that stuff, but that's kind of all that you get as you progress. There isn't a ton of variety of activities to do yet, and this will probably change with future updates and DLCs and all, but for now, unfortunately, I think the price of the game for me isn't quite justified by the overall game itself. Also, it's just not really polished enough to warrant that current price. I imagine the game's performance will also improve over time as they release more patches, but in my opinion, games should be released pretty much fully working, with only minimal bugs, and unfortunately, Dune Awakening falls just a bit short of that standard, both in terms of stability and optimization. My honest recommendation, if you're on the fence, would be to wait a bit and see how it pans out, and if the game goes on sale, that would be the perfect time to pick it up. So there, for myself, I think that's probably what I'm gonna do. I was really excited for this and it hasn't exactly panned out, but hey, that's what we sign up for when we become fans of the genre, huh? Either way, there you have it. That's everything you need to know about Dune Awakening before it launches on the 10th of June. What do you guys think? Is this the next big MMO for you? What do you like? What do you dislike? Do you have any concerns? Let me know in the comments below. I don't work for these guys, so I can't really fix any of it, but I really do want to hear what you guys think. But either way, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.